So good afternoon. Welcome to the first meeting of the Incontri di Archeologia e Storia dell'Arte of our lab of History, Epigraphy and Tradizione dell'Antico. It's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ioulia Tzonou. It's a pleasure to have Ioulia almost virtually in Italy, as we had the opportunity to be in Corinth with her. The students still have a nice memory of this visit of Corinth with Ioulia. Thanks to her competence and expertise, we visited the museums together and the site. So our speaker. She comes from Western Macedonia and graduated from the University of Athens. Then she moved to Cincinnati for the MA, discussing and investigating Bronze Age Cycladic petroglyphs. And for the doctoral dissertation, she worked on a huge mass of Mycenaean statuettes. I think more than 5,500 statuettes. This is quite impossible. Perhaps just Hercules did better. And so the dissertation was on a contextual analysis of Mycenaean terracotta figurines under the supervision of Professors Davis and Wahlberg. And for the first time, Ioulia tried to shift the paradigm of interpretation of those figurines, also arguing against, if I may call it Renfrew, but for the first time she addressed and shed lights on the context of the use and reuse of those figurines and the meaning of those figurines in the different contexts. So that was a very, very important thesis and core of other articles and contribution by Ioulia. She was a Schliemann and Spitzer Fellow at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, and she has excavated periods ranging from the Neolithic to modern area sites, and for this reason her competence span through the centuries and many typologies of materials and areas of interest, mainly Corinth and the Corinthians. She's an expert of those areas, as she was appointed curator for Corinth excavations in 2001, and then she was promoted first to assistant director, and she's now associate director of Corinth excavations. Her work, as I said, regards not only the Mycenaean figures and figurines, but also the history of our field, of our discipline. She worked on Carl Blegen, for instance, the personal and archaeological narratives about Blegen, with important contribution on this figure, and she also contributed to the Blackwell Companion to the Archaeology of Early Greece and the Mediterranean. On Blegen excavation, she organized an important celebration in 2015 in order to celebrate the centenary excavation of Blegen. And and I'm happy to have also the last edition of Corinth, the site guide, curated also by Ioulia, and she's working also on a volume on Corinth in many in different ages, mainly Mycenaean Corinth, and I'm happy that also Ioulia supervised some of my students. I would like to remember Giovanni, but also Federico and Giulio. Thanks to Ioulia, Giulio was able also to expand the interest among the two areas between Corinth and Syracuse. So you are part of our community, I should say, Ioulia. So we would like to have you back in Pisa as soon as possible. And after this condensed presentation, and sorry for this because your production is much more than my few words, Ioulia will present a lecture entitled "Producers and Consumers in Archaic Corinth, 800-500 BCE." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco, for this very warm welcome. It is definitely a pleasure to be speaking to the group today, and it has been a pleasure to have all of your students come and work in Corinth, because it is an asset to have young minds create more interest in different questions for us as we study the materials. Thank you. And I hope I would like a lot of questions and suggestions, as I will be taking you to Corinth today. And the talk I will be presenting is work in progress. It is something as I build as I go along. I first presented a version of it at the conference in Cambridge entitled "Making Cities, Economies of Production and Urbanization in Mediterranean Europe, 1000 to 500 BCE." The proceedings of this conference are now being edited by Margarita Gleba, Beatriz Marina Guillera, and Bella Dimova for publication by Cambridge University Press, and we expect the volume to be out very soon now. But building on that presentation, I'm working now on an expanded version that will be included in a volume we are preparing on one of the pottery production neighborhoods in Corinth, what we call the Potter's Quarter. And that volume is now being edited by Andrew Ward and Catherine Harrington, a number of scholars who are working on Corinthian pottery production are participating in that volume. So today, for me, this is an opportunity today to present my ideas and maybe how I want to start finding a new way to talk about archaic Corinth. And that's why I would really like to hear your questions and suggestions, and you are a new audience to me. So my purpose is to discuss both the central area of Corinth and the Potter's Quarter through the lens of the activities performed by the people who used these areas from roughly 800 to 500 BCE. And so, yes, my focus is on the people of archaic Corinth, and you see some of them here. I know it's mostly men, but there were women also. And you see them here dancing, all dressed up on a crater from the Traders Complex, and we will hear more about that complex. So my interest is what was their environment like? What did they produce and consume? And how did they relate with people from the Mediterranean, where we know they visited and exchanged their products? And my interest has always been to trace past people's activities in their systems of activities performed at systems of settings. And obviously central to the societies we study are the materials they produced, testimonies of these activities for us. We try to identify the reasons they produced and consumed them. And Corinth offers a very wide spectrum of human activity and interaction through time and space, as we trace it from the objects the Corinthians produced and traded, and among them pottery, textiles, metals, roof tiles. You see an example here from the first temple of Apollo, and they traded also building blocks. What you see is a quarry that was recently excavated by the Greek Archaeological Service. So as a prehistorian working in Corinth, I've been intrigued by the archaic period, a time that is central to the city's importance, but almost invisible in terms of physical remains on the site at the moment, except maybe for the 6th century temple of Apollo that you see here in the foreground to the north of the Acropolis of the city, Corinth, in the background. In recent literature, there's been some discussion, which is encouraging, and I can mention Kathy Morgan, Angela Ziskowski, Emilio Rodriguez Alvarez, Eleni Hasaki. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. So there is discussion going on about the period. But research on the site by Corinth Excavations directors during the last few decades has taken the interest away from early Corinth into the Roman and medieval periods. We are currently excavating, and we are excavating tons of Byzantine pottery, which is interesting to read, but we are hoping to get to the early periods. And you see why, you see how the central area of Corinth here is a palimpsest of many periods, because we do have here continuous habitation from the Neolithic period on, from the 6th millennium, and the Romans certainly, their construction was such that really altered the paleotopography considerably. And I can also show you an aerial view of the site with the modern village encroaching upon the site. So I believe it is crucial for us to get back and research the archaic period, asking new questions, and time is ripe to do exactly that as projects in the area investigate the harbor of the city. And unfortunately now in this image I cannot point out, but we're looking from the Corinthian Gulf south, and the harbor is at the point, Lechion Harbor is at the point where land is almost touching the edge of the site there. So the Lechion Harbor, there's important research being happening at the site there now by two projects, because we have a Greek-American collaboration with the effort of the Corinthia and California State University, headed by Paul Scott and Angela Ziskowski, and for the land part of the harbor, and also for the underwater part of the harbor by the Danish Institute of Archaeology, headed by Bjorn Loven in collaboration with the Underwater Area of Antiquities. So most of the data that has been produced up until now by these investigations relate to the Roman and Byzantine harbors, but forefront in the mind of the excavators and the investigators is to locate the harbor installations of the polis that sent out the colonists to the west. So also new, and you can see a lot of information on the internet about Legio and Legion projects. The Legion projects have fantastic sites on Facebook, fantastic pages on Facebook with a lot of very interesting video. So in addition to the harbor, new research is also taking place at the significant counterpart of Corinth in the colonization endeavor, Tenea, and that research is taking place, is headed by Elena Korka. Tenea was the mother city of Archias. I do not need to tell you this, the founder of Syracuse. And so we have spectacular finds that have recently come to light that show the wealth of the area, among them the twin kuroi of Tenea that are now being exhibited in the refurbished rooms in the Museum of Ancient Corinth, are being studied by publication by Konstantinos Kisas and I believe Mrs. Walter Karithis. They were erected as grave markers, as semata, in an archaic cemetery in the area of Klenia, what we believe was the ancient Tenea. And from another cemetery comes the sarcophagus and cover slab that you see in this slide on the left-hand side. And now you can see a close-up of the decoration on this sarcophagus lid that dates from the end of the 7th and into the 6th century. This comes from Heliomodi, so from another cemetery. And it is a rare piece of evidence that gives us a lot of information about large-scale paintings that existed and were probably the prototypes for the decoration that you see on a lot of the pottery, the orientalizing decoration that we see on the pottery of this time period. So I think it is really important when all of this research is happening in the area to go back and explore what was happening in Corinth at this time. And I would like now to turn to Corinth, concentrate on the central area, where the later Roman Forum extends, and on the Potter's Quarter. As I also try to understand, however, the whole landscape from the south, from Acrocorinth, the mountain, all the way to the sea, to Legio. The American School has been excavating here since 1896. There's vast information available. And we have been working here under the auspices of the Greek Ministry of Culture and the local Ephori of Antiquities, Panayota Kassimi, is in charge. And it's very important to collaborate since also the Greek Archaeological Service is conducting very important investigations in the area to fill in the picture of our excavations. And so Corinth is built on a number of uplifted marine terraces, and we have traces of habitation on a number of them going down to the sea. Charles Williams, who was director of the excavations for 3 decades from the 1960s to the 1990s, discussed that the Corinthian society transformed in the course of these 3 centuries, from the 8th to the 6th, that is the end of the geometric to the end of the archaic period, from an agrarian community into a manufacturing center with local and foreign customers. So in order to research how this transformation occurred, I propose to investigate the form and the function of the city as an urban center and economic community, and I attempt to recreate the complexity of production and consumption processes. The Corinthians took advantage of their resources for their own needs, but also for trading and profiting from them. And they received influences and imports in return. This complex of actions communicates the identity of the inhabitants of the polis. They were transformed in the course of these 3 centuries from farmers into craftsmen, into pioneers in major technological advances, into traders and entrepreneurs active in the Mediterranean and in the international community of their polis. So how all of this happened, how can we know about it? And I can show you in images, and I will use these maps in my talk. So we start rough, and I use rough periods. I know we archaeologists try to compartmentalize and put things in boxes. We do it for the ease of our discussion. And there is the whole problem of the chronologies and typologies, but I will frame it in the space of the century. So we start from the 8th century, roughly the geometric. We go into the Proto-Corinthian period, roughly the 7th century, and finally the 6th century, the Corinthian period. So how can we start even unraveling these transformations? And I take inspiration, let's say, and in Donald Haggis's work, in his publications about the archaic site of Azoria in Crete. And he thinks that we can examine patterns of, let's say, labor mobilization or organization of space, of communication and accessibility, of aesthetic physical forms such as monumentalization and visibility. And by examining these patterns, we can maybe create a conceptual view, a view of our mind of how the urban space was organized. And that can allow us to begin to model social activities and cultural processes as long-term patterns of activity and modes of behavior. And so we study the structuring of contexts, and contexts such as how food and other resources were procured, processed, stored, redistributed, and consumed, how spaces for food and craft production, for cult, domestic and communal activities were integrated and constructed on an intrasite level. And so in this framework, as outlined by Haggis, what I try to do is try to trace functions across space to recreate these developments in Corinth. And I base my descriptions of the archaeological contexts on Williams's meticulous excavations in the central area of Corinth, what you see here, going back in the 1960s and 1970s. For the Potter's Quarter, the excavations go back to the 1920s and 1930s. The area was excavated by Agnes Stilwell, and then Williams went back and did some additional work in the Potter's Quarter in 1981. So there is a huge amount of data and a lot of information. And to manage all of that, I try to trace contexts and activities, including funerary, cultic, industrial, management of water sources, communication, trade, and consumption of local and imported goods. And one side issue that has come out of this is that I am intrigued by this juxtaposition of industry and cult. We have both on site. To me, they would be activities that will be against each other, but not for the ancient Corinthians. And to start, since the formalization of the temple is still accepted as an essential aspect of early materialization of polis identity. I organized my discussion in the central area here around Corinth's two temples. So, and you see the location of the Temple of Apollo in the 6th century and the location in the 7th century here. We have first the reconstruction I showed you here by Robin Rhodes is of the early temple on site, the Proto-Corinthian temple, and then this was destroyed, and the 6th century temple was built, what's still standing today in the middle of the 6th, and you see a reconstruction of the 2nd temple. So my interest here is what was the landscape around the temples before they were built, and how did it change after they were constructed, if it did, in the 7th and the 6th centuries. So to start then with the 8th century, that is before the temple was built. What happens in the 8th century? What are the physical remains preserved? And what do they tell us about life in the 8th century, in 8th century Corinth? And it's interesting to think it in terms of cold stream discussion, that we have in the 8th century a thriving commercial polis rapidly increasing in size. That's how Coldstream describes city. Now, trying to find that thriving commercial polis is quite interesting and difficult, since the Romans really did cut deep to create their spectacular monuments. But we do have burials. We have a number of, the area in the 8th century was used a lot for burial. Now I show you one of the cemeteries that we have from the central area. And then another cemetery we recently excavated to the southeast in the Panagia area. And some of the pottery from that cemetery. So we have wells and we have burials, and the burials continue into the end of the 7th century. So the idea that people stop burying when the first temple goes up doesn't seem to hold. We don't have a shift at this time from the individual to the communal. So we have individual burials and some communal activities at the area represented. We do have some traces of management of water, traffic, and cult activities. Because what you see here are the small fragments of tripod dedications that we have from what we call Temple Hill, the area where the temple was. And these fragments that belong to cauldrons, like the one that you see from Olympia, the dates, however, a couple centuries earlier. I just included it as an example to give an idea of the whole piece. So these fragments that we have from Temple Hill date cult activities back to the second half of the 8th century. And those cauldrons were prestige goods that were embedded in practices of conspicuous consumption, such as boiling meat for communal feasts. And so their dedication in sanctuaries throughout Greece has been used as an indicator of a politically active elite. What is interesting is that recently Moritz Kinderlein from Humboldt University in Berlin has sampled our pieces, and this is an article that is forthcoming, that he will be publishing shortly. And I would like to thank him for sharing the information with me. And this research is being conducted in a general project that he's doing, working with tripods from Olympia and Kalapodi, and has found that one of our pieces is made from copper that originated in Jordan. So communal activities then, what is happening at the Potter's Quarter at the same time, while these cauldrons are being dedicated in the center of the city. So if we move now out west, we have the extensive neighborhood there, an industrial neighborhood that was active from the 8th century all the way to the 4th, producing pottery and figurines. And we possibly, and I can show you an image of the excavations and what was excavated back in the 20s and 30s. Additional evidence exists out there because there are fields that have not been expropriated that contain more pottery, because the major question for this production area is that even though an extent was excavated, we don't have a kiln. We don't have remains, actual remains of a kiln. So from already the 8th century, we have wasters. And I can show you some of the late geometric wasters from the area. So people are already producing pottery there. Mostly the wasters come from kotile and craters. And these are the pieces that were used at the time in the area. So while we know that there was pottery produced in the Potter's Quarter, an interesting discovery is that there is from the central area what may be a Thapsos waster. And the Thapsos pottery is really very important ware. It was favored by the Greek colonists and copied by local inhabitants in almost every colony in South Italy and Sicily in the second half of the 8th century. And recently, I can show you a piece you probably already know from Messina, and most recently Anastasia Gadolou has published a monograph on this type of pottery, arguing for its production in Achaia. So whether Thapsos were originated in Corinth or not, it is very significant at this point, I think, that in the context of Corinth's contacts with the West, already in this period, it may have been produced in Corinth, as is indicated by this piece of waster that has Thapsian characteristics. And just an interesting added piece is a couple of late geometric kotile that have ships on them. So communication by sea was already part of everyday life. At this point, it's not possible to know for good or to ascertain whether this production that started early on was in private hands or was it whether it was controlled by the state. Now, moving on to the 7th century, and this probably involved the whole city or a large part of the city, exactly because of its size and monumentality. And if the function of the temple was multiple, as Cathy Morgan has argued, including display of a sacred calendar, an archive, a money depository for sacred finds, costly dedications, what was the function of the houses or the structures around it? What we have from the temple are domestic and industrial structures that extend to the south of the temple already in the Proto-Corinthian and Corinthian periods. And we have evidence for the earliest small-scale metallurgical operation in Corinth, at least partly devoted to casting. And so you can see I'm talking about this industrial complex in the center of the central area, where Williams excavated an industrial courtyard with a furnace with a lot of ash and metal slag, and finds that include this mold for a spearhead. I show you a complete spearhead from our excavations in the Panagia Cemetery from one of the geometric graves. And this archaic pantile with a heavily vitrified round depression in its upper surface. The tile was no doubt used for setting down a small crucible just removed from the fire. The pottery from the area is illustrated here. So further down now from this industrial complex, we come to the traders complex to the north, to the west of the Lechion Road Valley there. The traders complex was excavated in the early 70s by Williams, and it is a large house. It's dated to the early and middle Corinthian periods from about 620 to 570. And in it, there was a very high percentage of imported wares from both east and west. And I include some of the pottery here. We have Bucaro, Chios chalices, Rhodian plates, Attic and Laconian mags, and East Greek amphoras like the one that you see here from Miletus. So the 7th century sees an increase in production in crafts such as metallurgy, manufacture of architectural terracottas and pottery, and molding of figurines. And at the Potter's Quarter, this is the period of great prosperity as is signified by substantial architectural remains on the site. Evidence for production again, and I show you here a map of the area of the Potter's Quarter with distribution of the deposits that contained wasters, starting from the late geometric period and going all the way to late Corinthian 3. So in the 7th century, in the Proto-Corinthian period, so the red stars, we have evidence of wasters and tri-pieces, like the cotili that you see here, among other pieces, and also broken vases, tripods from the kilns, and other overfired materials. Pottery making installations like circular pits for kneading or storing clay, and a floor of sun-dried clay for working clay existed in the area. This success of the ceramic products and the wealth accumulated from their trading and wide circulation may have led to the interest of the community to control or secure the premises. And it is possible this control is expressed in the construction of an early fortification wall that is dated already by the middle or as late as the 3rd quarter of the 7th century. Thus, the political organization already existed at that time to manage the people, to build a communal structure for the benefit of all during an important period in the urbanization of Corinth. And since you have this communal project, I guess the question again is whether the production was also centrally controlled, or whether the workshops there were individually owned. Now, can this increase in manufacture in the 7th century be explained by the contacts or presence of foreigners in Corinth? Potential presence, not clear evidence of foreign craftsmen, is seen by Sue Langdon in a forthcoming article, and I'd like to thank Sue for sharing the information with me. In this local mold that you see in the left hand, found in the Potter's Quarter. Sue believes that this mold appears to be derived from an 8th to 7th century Syrian ivory figurine. On the right hand, you see a 7th century Syro-Phoenician glass bead that was excavated in the Haron of the crossroads in the center of the city. So both of these, the figurine and the bead, underline the contacts the Corinthians enjoyed in the 7th century as the volume of Corinthian commerce increased. And this is the century of the predominance of Corinthian pottery abroad, which began in the last quarter of the 8th. So we saw contacts with the east. As for contacts with the west, we have Etruscan buccal pieces that are found in the Potter's Quarter, dating from about 620 to 550. And apart from the traders complex that we saw above, here at the Potter's Quarter, we have cantharoi and a possible alabastron. Contrary to other foreign sites where the buccal appear as votives, in Corinth, the find spots indicate that they had domestic function, since they're found in wells, as well as votive functions. They're also found, there is a piece that comes from the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore. Now, would Corinthians have used those black pieces when they themselves enjoyed the manufacture and use of colorful drinking vessels? Or would their overseas owners come with them to Corinth? It is possible that they signify actual presence of foreigners. If buccal indicated elite consumption and display back home, one wonders whether the presence of these cantharoi in Corinth may be viewed as evidence for banquets where participants were outsiders of elite social status. On the other hand, the pieces may have been commodities accompanying more valuable items of trade, such as metals and foodstuffs. Moving on to the 6th century, even though there are indications that maybe foreign trade is slowing down compared to the previous century, industry continued strong. In the central area, metallurgical activities were moved during the course of the century from the industrial complex there that I talked about in the Sacred Spring. So they moved all the way to the foundry that you see to the bottom of the slide, what we call the Tavern of Aphrodite foundry. And what was excavated there was a number of industrial pits. This is between the exterior and interior colonnade of the 4th century BC South Stoa. So there was iron oxide on the sides of the pits, ash burning along with iron and bronze slag. The idea is that iron and bronze everyday utilitarian pieces were produced here. And at the same time that these are produced, the second temple, the 6th century temple of Apollo, was in operation further north. In addition to metals, textiles were manufactured in the traders' complex, among other locations, and Margarita Gleba and Bella Dimova are analyzing the thousands of the loom weights that we have, not as many from the early as from later periods, but they believe that, I would like to thank them for the information, they believe that a loom set may probably existed in the traders' complex. So we have textiles there. along with all the imports, and textiles that may have been dyed in the dye works. The dye works are located on the east side of Lehion Road Valley, further, a little bit further south. I'm sorry I cannot point out, but I hope it's visible on the slide. And this is what the dye works basins looked like when Williams excavated them in the 60s. So basically, you have basins that are covered with hydraulic mortar. And Williams, I believe, concluded that they were for purple dye production because he did excavate murex shells from the area. Now, there's been some discussion about that, but it is a possibility that these basins are used for textiles to be dyed, and thus Corinth's fame for the exquisite and exotic colors of purple garments was beginning to form. In addition to all of this, pottery was also produced in the central area in the 6th century. You see here a number of defective cotyle that were dumped complete in a well underneath the Roman southeast building. And it's really interesting to see how they are uniformly blackened and blistered, and they show this, this pattern of misfiring as they were, all of them follow this pattern of misfiring as they were stuck in the kiln. They most probably originated from this workshop, the southeast workshop. The demand then for pottery was such that in addition to the central area, for the first time, all three known industrial quarters fashioning ceramics, the Potter's Quarter, the Anabloga, and the Tile Works were active, and each factory was specializing in a distinct category of products, a segment of the Corinthian industry. We saw above the Southeast Workshop specializing in drinking vessels. At Anabloga, we also have an area that was used for industry until about 560 BCE, and the potteries there were also specializing in drinking equipment. Other than pottery, a figurine mold and an unfinished figurine were in the production debris from Anabloga. According to Langton, the figurine is best paralleled in plaques made in Syria in the 7th and 6th centuries, and thus they indicate a continuous tradition of connections between the two areas from the previous century, as we saw above. Foreign influences, contacts, and possibly people may have been present at Anabloga, as was probably the case at the Potter's Quarter. The late 7th to early 6th is a period when production of pottery reached its peak at the Potter's Quarter, and it was taking place in several areas that you see here highlighted in blue and then also in yellow. And one major center was located to the east of the second tower of the classical city wall, and it is marked with a blue circle there. From that area, we have large numbers of wasters, early Corinthian and Middle Corinthian inokoe melted together in the kiln and then dumped together in a shallow depression hollowed out in the rock after an unsuccessful firing. You see how they were all melted together. And so this depression is a possible candidate for a kiln. We also have additional wasters from other deposits, from a well. You see here tripod pyxides from the east deposit. There is a large number of wasters from the period. Finally, the tile works was already in operation from the second quarter of the 6th century, and that's based on the earliest products that you see here that were found on site. The tile works, the line of production was very specific, The area was producing architectural terracottas, mold-made lutherium on stands, and mortars. The kiln from the area is later, dates from the middle or late 6th century. You see the plan of it in the notebook here from 1940, and a picture of the early kiln. There were successive kilns, classical kilns, then in the same area. In addition to using the products from the tile works themselves, the Corinthians were trading them. From the 7th through the 4th century, the majority of tiles used at Delphi were imports from Corinth. And a Corinthian red fabric lutherium imported in Athens is of a type that was produced at the tileworks in the 6th century. And also, tileworks is situated in an advantageous position in connection to the harbor at Lechion. So export there would be an easy way to get to the harbor, and actually a road was excavated by the Greek Archaeological Service with deep rats from wheels of chariots and carts, probably going southwest northeast towards the harbor from the area. So after going through all of these objects, let's now turn to some of the people, maybe more evidence of actual people, I don't know. So this is an exceptional find compared to other industrial locations. At the Potter's Quarter, we have a selection of names preserved, possibly of the people using the area and producing the pottery and the figurines. We have local names of potters and painters. A Hiklis is a potter who dedicated a kotili. But there are also inscriptions of names of foreigners and people of distinction, or people who were distinguished in other circumstances. You see here on this piece that has generated discussion about its date, and Johnson believes that it can date to the 8th century based on parallels from Pithecusae that show the same neatly cut incision in writing. So what we have here are names. The one Maleko that you see, the lower one, has been thought to be Phoenician, even though there are some objections to this identification. The upper one is Anrarios, and this may evoke an Italian origin. Also, Melandas is included, is a king or an eponymous official at Argos. On another piece, we have the name of Brichon inscribed, and that is a name that is attested early at Samos. And on a final piece, the inscription is in the Sicyonian alphabet. Even if we acknowledge the possibility that foreign names may not necessarily be indicative of foreign ethnicity, there is certainly a concentration of names here representing the regions in the Mediterranean where the Corinthians had contacts at the time: Phoenicia, Italy, and closer to home, Sicyon, Argos, and Samos. The Potter's Quarter thus emerges as an international community. Of course, the question of the identity of the painters and potters and whether it is traceable is a very complicated matter, best exemplified in the question of the painter of the Gigi vase. There is also John Papadopoulos' uncertainty regarding the identity of the potter, whether the potter was Corinthian or Corinthian trained. The potter who set up his workshop and kiln in the Athenian Keramikos sometime in the early 7th century BC. What we can say, I believe, is that the Corinthians in the 7th century, and at the height of Corinth's Mediterranean-wide reputation, were definitely producing themselves and inspiring others to make products desirable by everybody. The Corinthian trademark was popular, and that's why it was so widely imitated. The above examples demonstrate how actively people were moving between regions, learning from each other and influencing each other. And a final illuminating case in this matter, I believe, is this example. I only have part of it from Johnson. It is from a conical inoque that was excavated in a grave in Euboea in Kimi. It dates from the first half of the 7th century. And on that inoque, an Etruscan inscribed his name, but also he inscribed the abecedaria that you see here. The one, and he was not a very good scholar, or he was trying to learn the crazy alphabets. He's trying to learn the Corinthian above and the Euboic below. He's making a very big effort. So he's trying to learn Chimaean and Corinthian. And the Proto-Corinthian inoque may have been made either by an immigrant Corinthian or by a local potter who is copying a Proto-Corinthian type. So, to conclude, within these 300 years, from the 8th to the 6th century, the Corinthians changed their landscape and transformed their way of life. We have dispersed settlement and industry areas that developed in the central area, and then also at the Potter's Quarter, at Anaploga, and the tile works. And the Corinthians fortified the Potter's Quarter in the 7th century. This is the only location so early that was fortified, and there is always the question of whether this, the remnants of the fortification wall there extended only around the Potter's Quarter or in the rest of the area as well. In the 6th century, we have another fortification wall that has been excavated recently by the Greek Archaeological Service in the plain to the north. So we have communal projects such as the building of the fortification wall, but also management of waters, construction of roads, and among all the building of monumental architecture. And all of these are indicative of the organization of the community in the 7th and the 6th centuries. We have the temple, built the first in the 7th century and then the second one in the 6th century, when more temples were probably built in the area. And the people of Corinth are forming their identity around these major public constructions. And industry at the same time is increasing from the 8th to the 6th, as workshops were built throughout the landscape, because from the few wasters that we have from the 8th century at the Potter's Quarter in the central area, we end up having several industrial establishments that are in operation during the 6th, and several locations of production existing within the Potter's Quarter itself. The tile works in the 6th century shows that we have expansion in manufacture in different products. So apart from pottery and figurines, we have metals, textiles, heavy, coarse, and utilitarian vessels, and architectural elements, all produced and showing the breadth of production and the promising export resources that the Corinthians possessed at the time. And the contacts and possible presence of foreigners intensified manufacture of this wide range of products, which were desirable locally and abroad. The imports in Corinth describe an international community, one that is also represented most vividly in the names of the people at the Potter's Quarter. This diversity of products and people shows this vivacious society, an ingenious producer and consumer of goods. And we have thus a variety of activities that were performed by the Corinthians, who definitely bring in them a great amount of wealth that is reflected in their communal projects. Whether this industry and trade were privately run or state-controlled, the Corinthian innovations in technology and production resulted in their success and their Mediterranean-wide fame. And so they were actually following the general trends of the time, because we have a new organization of labor and a wider range of craft products that modified the economy in archaic Greece. New building projects and political organization required greater specialization. The city was the location of exchange of products and the marketplace. The exchange and accumulation of wealth from several distant areas became possible because of the various kinds of flow of material, flow of people, flow of information to and from other cities. The economy was no longer based purely on a self-sufficient household economy, but demanded a great exchange of products and a surplus to finance new building projects. Thus, Corinth was an urban network, a city that facilitated communication within and between societies, and a driver of contact and development for triggering societal and environmental change. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I would like to thank also James Herbst, Petros Zalatolas, and Christina Kolb for the drawings and the color photos of this presentation. And a number of these images can be seen on our digital archive that we would very much like for people to use, and the address there is scsa.net. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ioulia. Thank you for this excellent presentation, very inspiring. You gave us a lot of information, very generously. You provided with a lot of details, and for us working on the western side of the Mediterranean, of the Greek world, it's particularly important to have information regarding the first phases of the city. From my point of view, try to better understand what Corinth was in the period of decolonization, when people moved from Corinth to other new settlements abroad. And for this reason, I really enjoyed your presentation, and also the visions into general centuries. And for this reason, I would like to start. I have many questions, but I want to focus on two main questions. The first one regards the beginning, the geometric period. Because you show this slide with the burial area in the city center, if I'm not wrong, if I correctly remember the slide. So the cityscape is very peculiar in that period, because we have graves, tombs in the area that will be soon after dedicated to the religious practices, let's say. And for this reason, the question is, where is the city during the geometric period? Do we have, usually, this is your presentation from a methodological point of view is very, very important, because also in the Western cities, we usually work more on the necropolis data and less on the urban materials. This is also because we have few information from the city, from the cityscape. For instance, in many Western cities, we usually ground our evidence on the burials and not on the urban settlements. So, as I said, my question relates to the very original place of the city of Corinth during the 8th century. And then the second one, it struck me this part regarding the multi-directionality, I should say, of influences in Corinth coming from many places. And if I correctly understood, copper comes from Jordan. This is a very important and significant element of discussion, also in terms of imported figurative patterns as the Orientalization, for instance, just to be synthetic, but also what you showed with this Syro-Phoenician bead or the local mold or the bucero gave us a different frame for the city of Corinth. Usually we prefer, or we have preferred to use a monodirectional way to interpret, for instance, pottery. So from the mother city to the colony, or from Corinth to other cities in the Mediterranean, and local imitation in Italy and other places. But here you showed us something more significant. So the sources of the many sources of influences and artistic patterns used originally in a very original way, used by the Corinthian potters and artists. So, and this is something to me unusual, since we look back to Corinth as the beginning of everything, let's say. So these are my questions or comments, and in case I have others, but I want to give room to your answers and questions from the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for speaking for so long and taking into everybody's time. Yes, it's really. Thank you very much for your comments. The first question about where the city was in the 8th century has been something that has been discussed a lot by a number of scholars, Williams among them, Roebuck. This idea also about the urbanization, the synikismos. So when were, let's say, the individual villages combined into a settlement, and how can we find that out? Where was that settlement? And recently, it is quite important that we have more excavations that are done also to the north that have given us more burials and more structures. The big question is what happens with the burials in the central area. They're organized probably in family units because you have groups of burials next to wells. So you don't have the houses because they were destroyed, but the initial organization, let's say, of life was according to family units. What we see gradually, maybe throughout the 8th century, is that the burials gradually moved to the plain to the north, maybe as this area is becoming a center more dedicated to communal activities, like the dedication of the tripods on Temple Hill. But the curious thing is that we do still have some burials in the area into the 7th century. And the question is, what happens in the north, in the plain to the north? The excavations by the Greek Archaeological Service have uncovered an apsidal structure, an 8th century apsidal structure in the plain to the north. And similar post holes of a structure such as this were investigated by Williams in the Potter's Quarter. So I don't really know what to think about how many settlements we may have had. Did we have a center in the area of the Potter's Quarter that was then fortified in the 7th century, and then another in the central area, and another in the plain? But where was the center that was in charge of all of these areas? It is, for us, it is a big question. And that becomes also in later centuries the question of where was the agora of Corinth? Whether it was underneath the Roman Forum or whether it was further north. And now the director of Corinth excavations, now Chris Pfaff, is investigating an area to the north of the theater where we're excavating now, but we're still in the Byzantine layers, or we have reached maybe early Roman layers. He is looking, one of his research questions is if that area can be investigated with the possibility of having the agora there. So yes, it is a big question. Where was the center of the early city? And then, I do believe that we need to trace all these influences in the objects that we have in Corinth from the different places. And that's why I believe that our interaction in learning the materials that the other person has will be very beneficial for our research in the future as we learn to identify the pieces that are imported from different places. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So questions, comments from students, colleagues, friends?
If I may,
Very.
Thank you very much, Ioulia, for your excellent presentation and for your precious updating on recent excavations in Corinth. And it was really fascinating to see the development of the city over these 3 centuries through the material evidence, of course. And my question is, of course, it's problematic to propose generalizations about this development of the city. But my question is, can we detect, trace a development that is more hierarchical organized, or more, how can I say, nuanced, more heterarchical in its development? Or if we can trace differences in the 3 centuries. So because you mentioned communal activities, of course, the construction of the fortification, of course, individual burings, how could I say, in the necropolis in the 8th century, of course. So how we can characterize this development in a hierarchical or heterarchical way, of course, in respect also to the literary sources, the historical sources about Corinth. I know it's a very complex question, and these are really important paradigms for interpreting the city, but just if you just to have your opinion or these ideas on this development. And a second, just a curiosity about the Heron at the crossroads if you can tell us more about this building, because I don't know anything about this structure. So if thank you very much again for your brilliant presentation. Thank you, Ioulia.
Thank you very much, Federico. Yes, it is. I didn't include anything about the literary sources. It is a very important part. You're absolutely right. And it is a very important question. Is it heterarchical or hierarchical? If you think about, was it Periander that in Herodotus, he's given advice to cut all the weight that is protruding above the general group by, was it from the tyrant of Samos, that he received the advice that he had to cut all the people who were rising above average. So I think the struggles between the families must have been really intense. The aristocratic families, and that's why you're absolutely right. My interest is who was in charge of all of these obviously very wealthy and very lucrative businesses, if we see it in our terms, all the wealth accumulation, and how did this wealth accumulation change, let's say, the traditional aristocracy? If you have really powerful, if you see it in terms of starting from the agrarian community of the 8th century, where you'd have an established aristocracy, and go into the 6th, where you have people accumulating a lot of wealth because they are involved in all of these major production venues, and bringing all of these materials everywhere. So who was using the bucro cantaroi, and why? Was it a matter of ostentatious display? People really powerful who wanted to show off that they had all these materials from far away, the beads in the Heron of the Crossroads. What happened at the Heron of the Crossroads was that Williams excavated in the late 70s, I think, and this was an enclosure that he believes was built in order to pay respect to burials of the 10th century BC that were discovered in the process of constructing a road. I believe that he dates it to the Middle Corinthian period, earlier Middle Corinthian period. So they built this temenos to enclose the burials, the burials of ancestors, the burials of heroes. And also I think the skeleton that one of the skeletons that he recovered was a big boned male skeleton. And I think he also has a crater from there that has the name of Achilles. So there is other corroborating evidence that shows a hero cult of the archaic period, the people of the archaic period, going back to the geometric, tracing their descent. So yeah, it is really important. The literary evidence, if we had more literary evidence for Corinth the way Athens has, but that's always the case. An important comment for Gianfranco's comment before for Jordan. This is something that is now Moritz Kinderlen is now finding out. I think he is. He's been looking into Olympia and Kalapodi as well. He's published the results for Olympia and Kalapodi. I can send you the information if you are interested. And after he did the analysis of our pieces, he puts it with his one type. And yes, it is important to think of resources coming from the East, and the whole question of what was the role that Corinth played in the Orientalizing period.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and if you can send me the reference, I would be grateful. So more questions, comments.
May I ask a question, please?
Hermano, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your very interesting paper. My question is, what are the specific and peculiar features of the Corinthian potter's quarter compared to other archaic Greek potter's quarter that we know of, like the Keramikos of Athens, for example? I would probably think about Athens because it was the great enemy of Corinth. As you mentioned, for example, a couple of very interesting features, like the you talked about the juxtaposition of both industrial and cultic activities in Corinth, as well as this specialization of activities. So I was wondering, how does it compare with other situations known from other areas of the Greek world in the archaic period, maybe especially Athens, or even other areas? Thank you very much.
I don't know. The answer is yes, you're absolutely right. I need to look and see, and maybe see if the Corinthian persona in terms of production is different than the way people were doing the same kind of production in other areas. I don't know very much about the Corinthian, the Athenian keramikos. I thought the only thing I seem to remember was that there was a lot of burials in the area, and the idea was that it had to be away from the center of the city, so that the production didn't influence or didn't bother the inhabitants in the city. I need to look into the early period of keramikos to see what kinds of evidence they have for the early period there. The juxtaposition of industry and cult in our case is in the central area, which I also find, I don't know how to discuss it, because I guess, as in our areas now, in our cities, we have the you have the church, but then you also have the supermarkets. I guess we may think of activities that do not work well together, but you have to do both in an area. But it's strange that you're making spearheads, and I don't know, maybe you're dedicating the spearheads then to the temple. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I do need to, and also other major archaic sites where we have production. I don't know. Do you have any production areas in Agricenter? Sorry?
For the archaic period,
No, I
we
don't
have.
No?
In Metaponto, probably. In Metaponto, I'm quite sure about it. Agrigento, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about Agrigento. But
how about Syracuse?
I'm sure only about the Keramikos of Metaponton, is dated to archaic period. So, okay, thank you very much, by the way.
Thank you.
I see Giulio.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Ioulia. You gave us lots of food for thought. And so, as we knew already. So I would have many questions, but I will concentrate only on few of them. And I was wondering about the relationship between cult activities and production activities that you mentioned at the beginning, and I thought about the Steely Shrine in the Potter's Quarter, and could you tell us more about your opinion on the relationship between these two activities? Since also I think also in the central area of Corinth, in the early period, there is some evidence of the coexistence of these two activities side by side. So this is one question. The other is about the colonization, because it is now getting even more clear that the first cult activities in Syracuse dates back to the late 8th century. So just afterward, just in the aftermath of the foundation of the city. So my question is, do you think that there could have been a relation in reverse? So from the colonization experience back to the mother city, about the formation of the city, the foundation of the city. So I don't know. It's just, I think, I don't know if it is just my perception, but I think that there is a clear evidence that Syracuse perceived itself as a city in the late 8th century. We have communal necropolis, burial. We have communal cult places. And it seems that maybe this experience of colonization could have influenced back the motherland, the mother city. So I don't know. It's just my an opinion that arrived in my mind. So I would like to know what's your what is your opinion about it? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Giulio. Yes, the Steely Shrines, absolutely. And you're quite right. There are Steely Shrines in the Keramikos. I left them out because they date later. They date from the 5th. This is the 5th century BC on. And in the framework of the industry, we do have cult. The way, let's say, we have independent Scufi plaques, Poseidon represented. So we do have, let's say, gods, deities that protect the industry of pottery production in these areas. And I think the Steely Shrines, we can see in that light. The people really needed protection of this very important process of pottery production that very frequently failed, even though we concentrate on the finished product. So yes, the industry and cult there is very important, and that's why I guess in the central area, maybe what they were producing at the temple were things that were dedicating to the gods. It's just that in the juxtaposition in the central area, there is production that I don't know how it relates to the god, how these metallurgical activities relate to the cultic establishments in the central area. I mean, then also for the back and forth between the exchange and the communal aspects. I mean, would you see the colonization as a communal activity? It had to be a communal activity. And people would have to have with them their gods protecting them on the way. But then I don't know how much they would bring back from Syracuse to Corinth. That this is very important. And finding also early evidence, 8th century, more 8th century, because all the materials that we have coming, I think, from the West is more concentrated in the 7th and the 6th, which you would expect because the establishment of the colony was in the second half, late in the 8th. We should stop having this river of words.
Thank you. And we have also this comment by Maria Concetta Parello regarding kilns in Agrigento, dating back to the half of the 6th century, producing amphora AD or BC? AD. Perhaps we can ask Maria Concetta if she can illustrate this activity in Agrigento.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have anything for the anything yet for the period that we're discussing?
Gianfranco, BC,
Sì.
BC, of course.
BC.
Of course. A mistake.
Yeah. I suspected it was BC.
That's very interesting. Then I would like to see what was the area then with the kilns, where was it, and what were the products?
The area of the kilns is near the gate. The gate near one of the near one of the gates. Near the walls of the ancient city, there is a very important production area, a very important production area that dates back to half of 6th century BC, and the production are courseware and amphorae and choroplastic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you.
So more questions, comments?
If I may, a curiosity.
Giulio, you again,
Yeah.
from previous use against Corinth.
I was really intrigued by the representation of ships on Kotile. It's fantastic. It was the first time I saw them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was very happy to see that they have representations of ships. The only question is whether they were ships for small ships around
for commercial purpose or military purpose,
or not for ships around the Corinthian Gulf, or whether they were big enough to be going to Sicily. Mm-hmm.
If I may, I have a question related to the painted sarcophagus you showed us.
Yes.
And this question comes from a different chronology and materials, that is the Pestland tombs and the connection with the Pestan potters during the 4th century BCE. In this case, do you have an idea about the relationship between potters, painters, and painters for the tomb? Should we admit a painter working on both workshops, or do you think that the competence and the skills are totally different from pottery to small, medium-sized walls like the tomb?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, very, very interesting. Elena Korka published that in Centenary, in a volume on that we did in Corinth a while back. I guess for me, there's two aspects in the question, Gianfranco. First, there is the design. So who had the book of designs or the motifs? So there were some people who were designing what would decorate, how you would make the lions, or how the lions would be heraldic. And then the second half would be how you apply the motifs on different media. Because I would imagine that there would be also paintings, large-scale paintings, I don't know, maybe in the walls of the first temple. There is paintings from Isthmia. So you'd have people, I would imagine, specializing in large scale and then producing small. I mean, I don't know whether we really know, because some painters, let's say, specialized in Cotile, and others specialized in Ariboloi. You would have specialization even within the workshop along the lines of different surfaces of pots. So I'm sure the set of skills for doing a wall may be slightly different than the set of skills than for doing a pot. But there is also overlap, I would imagine, because you need to have the books with the designs and everything. Yeah, it's quite intriguing. It's really spectacular to see the sarcophagus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing piece. So we have a few more minutes if we wish to have questions and comments for Ioulia.
Other question, if I may? I don't know if.
Like Giulio, perhaps the last.
I don't want to. I don't want. I don't want to steal time to other discussants. But I was wondering about the role of Corinth in this context.
Yes, I have left it
and
outside.
the alleged temple of Aphrodite.
Yes.
Very simple questions by Giulio.
No, it was just a curiosity. Maybe we can organize another meeting about it. Sorry.
No, he's absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Giulio, because I thought a lot about it. Both the harbor to the north, and it would be great to find out about that, and what was on Corinth. Because my interest for Corinth starts from the Cyclopean remains, the Bronze Age remains up there. And then I don't know that we know exactly what the line of the wall was up there in the 6th century or the 7th, if we can even date. There is definitely large polygonal structures, but we don't know exactly how the line of the fortification wall run. And we also, as far as the temple is concerned, we know from later sources that a temple existed there. But for the time period that we are discussing, we have evidence of pottery, so Blagin excavated pottery up there. And we have evidence of, I think one wall that was covered by a layer that contains 7th century pottery, so predates the 7th century. So there is research, I think, that needs to be happening up there as well for the early period. The mountain, what was the habitation up there like, is another big question. We assume that there was a temple early on, but this is because of knowledge that we have from later periods. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think it's time to conclude this very stimulating and refreshing Corinthian afternoon with Ioulia Tzonou of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. We hope to come back soon to Corinth, yes, and visit the city again with you, and to share more time together. And since we have also Maria Concetta Parello with us, Ioulia should come to Agrigento and stay with the Agricenter team for a period, so in order to make a stronger connection between Greece and Sicily. So thank you very much, Ioulia, for being with us and for your paper. And I suppose it will be food for thoughts, as Giulio said before, and we will be in touch for these and other reasons, and hope to see you soon in Greece or in Italy. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and see you next time. Ciao.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Many thanks. Thank you.